All right, Joseph with Landscape King. This is the Landscape King podcast. And today's episode, we are Spring Has Sprung. So we're in March right now in Baton Rouge, and there's a lot of things we can talk about that are happening right now. What I really want to talk about, the first thing is we're still early March, almost mid-March, but we're probably going to have one more freeze. You really don't, kind of the old, in like Farmer's Almanac, and some people just say you don't really have spring until the pecan leaves have leafed out. And the pecan leaves have not leafed out yet, so we're probably still going to have one more cold snap, but people are still planting warm season annuals. So the first thing, it's spring. What does that mean? Weeds. Weeds everywhere. Clover. All of the different kinds of broadleaf weeds. We're getting sedges are coming up. I've seen a lot of torpedo grass. Weeds, weeds, weeds. Weeds in the lawn. Weeds in the flower beds. Weeds galore. So what do we need to do right now? We need to first, especially in the lawn, instead of just throwing out a weed and feed, the best thing to do is to go ahead and just kill those weeds. So we want to just use a selective herbicide. You can go to Clegg's or your local nursery, wherever you're at, find the best cocktail remedy of what they say to use as a selective herbicide. There's a product called atrazine, Weed Free Zone, and a non-ionic surfactant. There's one called Spreader Sticker that works really well. But just putting that together, we just need to kill those weeds. You can also call a lawn care treatment company. There's a few in town, or there's a lot actually, but there's several that we refer people to. There's one called Grassroots. Kevin Dinkle is really great. He's been really good to our clients. But you want to kill the weeds first. That's the point. Kill the weeds first, and then we can fertilize. Now, being that we're still probably going to have one more cold snap, we don't want to fertilize quite yet in the lawn. I mean, you probably are okay, but if the thought is that if you fertilize right now or too early and you have that new growth come, that you might, the lawn might burn a little bit when we have that new frost. But truth is that grass is coming right now anyway. So whether you fertilize right this second or in a few weeks, now is the time to kill the weeds and go ahead and fertilize that lawn. Now, you can get a company to do those treatments for you, but you definitely just want to get rid of the weeds first. Now, in the flower beds, we're going to have weeds as well. But once we kill the weeds, we want to use a pre-emergent. There's many different products out there. There's an active ingredient in the product we use. It's called prodiamine. We also use a generic snapshot. We'll just use generic snapshot, just the granular. A lot of things you would find at like a Lowe's or Home Depot or your local nursery would be dimension. But this isn't going to kill the weeds. It's just a granular weed preventative. There's also liquids that we spray the liquid prodiamine. That works really well too. But you want to get that out now. You really wanted to get that out a few weeks ago before all these weeds came up. But the quicker you can get that out, the better. Then it'll be good to go. And that's going to give you that weed prevention for the rest of the season. Another weed that's in the lawn that people need to spray right now are stickers. So the sticker patches, they'll start coming out now. If you don't get them now, you're going to have issues getting rid of them, and they're going to start maturing. And then when the kids are walking out in the lawn, or when the dog is out there, or when you're walking out there barefoot after Friday night, whatever, it's going to be a pain. So we want to get rid of those as well. So we want to kill weeds, and we want to prevent them. Basically, now is our growing season in South Louisiana. Growing season has started. People are I'm seeing it everywhere. There's lawn trucks out everywhere. They came out of their caves. All the lawn care guys are ready to start cutting grass. You see all the trucks. You can smell that cut grass out, and it makes me happy being a landscaper. I love spring. And obviously because we have a lot of work, but I guess over the years, spring is just a happy time. You know, it's the new season. It's the new emergent of plants and things like that. So weeds, we want to get rid of the weeds. We want to put out our preventative. What else are we wanting to do in the landscape right now? We need to start thinking about watering. Okay, so it's getting hotter. The temperatures are rising. We want to go ahead and turn our irrigation systems back on. You might have had some damage over the winter. Your backflow preventer, if you've got a high pressure system, your backflow preventer might have been busted over one of the freezes. You probably have some heads that are just missing some nozzles. You probably have some adjustments that need to be done. We want to go ahead and knock all that out to where we can start watering. Once we turn our systems back on, right now, like I said, it's still early March, early spring. We can go ahead and start watering every other day for 20 minutes. Now in the flower beds, we're gonna have a different water requirement depending on if you have a high pressure or micro system. The high pressure, and we talked about it before, but the high pressure system is just tying into the main water line. And we talked about this too, that at least in our area, when you have a irrigation system, you can get a second water meter installed. The city will come out, install a second water meter, and then they only charge you for that water and not the sewage. Whereas if you just tied into that same water line that runs to your house, you're gonna get charged for the water and the sewage. So that's good to know. But if you have that high pressure system, you're tying into the main water line, you're having PVC under the ground, and then you're gonna have a controller. The controller is going to be either in the garage or on the wall. I'm just explaining this so you know if you have a high pressure system or not. A lot more common system is going to just be a micro. I mean, both of these are very common, especially in Baton Rouge. But a lot of people for flower beds, the more common system for flower beds, I should say, is the micro irrigation. And this is just going to be a digital timer, 2 AA batteries, digital display screen. Ties into it doesn't tie in, you just connect it to your faucet. A lot of times we'll use a hose splitter. Then we'll connect the digital timer to that. Then we have our 1/2-inch tubing that runs throughout the beds. This is a more cost-effective system. These little plastic stakes go into the ground. They connect to the 1/2-inch tubing. And then they just have 180, 360, 90, whatever heads. And then it just waters the flower beds. Now, sometimes you can use a soaker hose too. But these are the main things you're going to see, and right now is the time to turn these systems back on. We want to make sure we have these running. If you're watering in your flower beds, probably 6-7 minutes every other day would be fine. If you're planting some annuals, we could maybe 2 to 3 minutes every day, but we definitely want to start watering. We don't want to overwater. This is a mistake I see a lot is it starts getting hot. People will go ahead and put their sprinkler out. And the worst time to water really is at night. And I see it all the time. But if you water, especially if 5 o'clock you get home, you put the sprinkler out there and you have it running for 4 hours and you forget about it. 1, you're going to overwater. 2, because we're overwatering at night, we're going to make that lawn more susceptible to fungal disease. And then you're going to have issues. And you're probably going to have issues with weeds. So there's a few weeds that'll start popping up. Kalinga, however you want to say it. It's this little almost grassy looking weed. You probably have some POA. And then you're also going to you'll see a lot of dollar weed. That's often an indication that person's overwatering or you have some areas that are holding water. So let's be smart about it. Let's make sure we're watering in the morning. Let's not overwater. And just look at it. Oftentimes the plants will tell you, okay, just listen to your plants. They'll start talking to you, right? The next thing we want to make sure we're mindful of is because it's early spring, we can go ahead and start pruning heavy. So if let's say you had some knockout roses that were maybe 5-6 feet tall and you wanted to keep them shorter and they're starting to get leggy, now is the time to go ahead and just cut those as low as you want. The knockouts or the drifts, however big they are, really February is the time to cut roses, but knockouts and drift roses, they'll come back. I mean, you can prune them at any time, but now is the time to cut them way back. And what that's going to do for a knockout and a drift rose specifically is if we cut them way back right now, I'm saying cut them to where there's only 6 inches, maybe a foot, really 6 to 8 inches would be fine, but just leaving that exposed, that plant is going to start leafing out and it's going to get super full. If we don't do that, especially for knockouts and drifts, if we don't do that right now, in the middle of the summer, they'll be blooming like crazy, but they'll be leggy. And what I mean by leggy is the top is really full and the bottom is really bare, and they're just not as nice. Right now, all over Baton Rouge, you see azaleas, the beautiful azaleas. You drive around, this is the time for them to shine because they don't look great all the time, but now they're just gorgeous. This time every year, I'm always reminded that I actually love azaleas because throughout the year, whenever they're not blooming, it's a nice bush. You could be shaped up, but they're just gorgeous. They really are. And there's nothing like it when you're driving down. You see the purple, the pinks. There's all different colors, the whites. they're really, really nice. So now is the time for azaleas to bloom. So what that means is, as soon as they're done blooming, if you want to have them manicured in a way, if you want them to be a certain shape, height, whatever, as soon as they've finished blooming, let's cut those back. If you wait too long on azaleas, let's say they finish blooming, you let them grow all season, and then maybe in August, you start cutting them or pruning them, you're going to start taking off the buds, the flowers for the next spring. So it's very important that we cut back those azaleas immediately as soon as they're done blooming. And then we don't touch them, and we just let them grow. And you can kind of manicure them a little bit, however you like them. A lot of times people just like them natural, but it's the same thing. Like we talked about with the knockout and the drift rose. If you let a plant just specifically if you let any kind of plant just grow crazy, eventually, if they're not pruned properly, they start getting bare on the bottom, and then they just have this awkward look. It's just better to where, especially with the azaleas, as soon as they're done blooming, let's just shape them up, and then they're good. The next season, they'll come out beautiful flowers, looking great again. Now, we want to make sure that as soon as in the lawn, as soon as the weeds are dead, we can go ahead and start fertilizing. We talked about that a little bit. Fertilizer we recommend is just Osmocote Pro. And there's a label on there of how you put it out. And the same with the lawn as well. Either call a professional, or if you want to, you can try to do it yourself. But everybody just uses the weed and feed. A lot of people use the weed and feed in the lawn. And it's just better if you can use the selective herbicide first, get rid of the weeds, and then fertilize. Because if you do the weed and feed at the same time, what you're actually going to do is feed the weeds. Sometimes a weed, if you don't kill all the weeds and we're putting that fertilizer out, it's going to actually stimulate new growth in the weeds, and then you can mess up your lawn. So that's why we say to use the selective herbicide first, kill the weeds, and then come out there and fertilize. Okay, so as far as flowers blooming, we talked about the azaleas. I want to talk to you about some of my favorite flowers that are plants that are going to bloom this time of year. So one of the coolest things is the Japanese magnolia. So the Japanese magnolias are still blooming a little bit, but it's a deciduous tree. And what they do is they lose their leaves. Because it's deciduous, they lose their leaves in the wintertime. Before they leaf out in the spring, they're full of flowers. And it's the weirdest thing that this naked tree has all these beautiful pinkish purple flowers. Almost looks like a tulip flower. Probably one of my favorite flowering trees. And I'll probably say one of my favorite for every one of these because they're all my favorite, right? I'm not in this just because I kind of fell in love with plants just from working at the nursery that I worked at when I was young, working at Clegg. So Japanese magnolias, they're just about done blooming. The next thing, like we talked about, the azaleas are gorgeous. The next thing that's going to start blooming, so it's the Chinese fringe. And once these started blooming, there were some at the Lockhart McDonald's. And the minute those things started blooming, every person that came into Clegg's, "Whoa, what's that tree down the street that's blooming? I want one of those." And so that's whenever the Clegg's and your local nursery, they get strategic and they'll start putting things that are in bloom at the very front, and that's when you'll buy them all up. But it's a really cool tree too. It's going to get a little bit wider. It's going to get much larger than the Japanese magnolia, but the Chinese fringe will start blooming too. And they're just gorgeous white flowers, and they're just full of them. Other things that are blooming pretty soon, I really like we talked about the knockout roses, the drift roses. And even if your knockouts or drifts are starting to bloom, if they're leggy, I would go ahead and still prune those down. And I'd still take them down probably 6 to 8 inches, especially the drifts. Now, the drifts, we're going to want to prune those like 4 to 6 times a year, because if we don't prune those, they're going to, like I said, they're going to get leggy. We want to keep pruning them so they're full. And what that's going to do is, one, it's going to keep them full. Two, they're going to be constantly blooming. And the drift rose is more of a ground cover rose. It stays about 1 to 2 feet tall, 2 to 3 feet wide. And it just blooms spring through fall. There's an apricot color, there's a coral color, there's a white, there's a popcorn that's a yellow. People don't like roses because of thorns, But this is a nice plant if you have a place that's not really close to a sidewalk, but somewhere where you just want to pop a color. The drift roses do that really well, and they bloom spring through fall. And you can keep them in relatively controlled to where they're not out of hand. Now the knockouts they're beautiful too, and they come in several different colors as well. But they are going to get bigger. I've seen them sometimes, like I said, 5-6 feet tall. If you let them get that big. But I like to cut those back as well. Pretty soon we're going to start, really in the summertime, we're going to start having some hydrangeas bloom. So other things that are blooming now that it's spring, we're now entering the warm season. So now it's time for warm season annuals. And we're talking about vincas, we're talking about marigolds, we're talking about a plethora of flowers that are going to be blooming. And now is the time you can go ahead and start planting those, even annual salvias. Now the difference between an annual and a perennial is that annuals live for a season and then they don't come back. Perennials live for a season, but then they go dormant for a season and then they come back. Now in South Louisiana, there's some things that would be perennials other places that are annuals here and annuals other places. Like if you go to South Florida, there's things that we call annuals that they have in the ground all the time, like crotons. In South Florida, you'll see crotons just planted in the flower bed, and we really only use crotons seasonally, or we'll use them indoor. Schefflera too, it's crazy if you're in South Florida, the things that they can just, because it doesn't get as cold there during the winter, they're able to just keep things all the time. The Schefflera, there's rubber plant you would see. There's all kind of indoor plants that we could never keep outside during the winters that they're able to keep, and it's really, really cool. So now is the time to go ahead and plant your warm season annuals in South Louisiana. Go ahead and get those in the ground. Go ahead and you can fertilize those as well. And then just once we get to the cool season, you can go ahead and replace those as well. They're just going to die back when it gets cold. You'll do your cool season annuals, your pansies, your petunias, your violas, and then whenever warm season comes, we'll switch them out again. So other things we need to prepare for in the spring, like I said, people are starting to cut the grass now. We can go ahead and do what we just call flower bed cleanups. The spring cutback, get everything pruned the way you want, get your weeds out, and put your fresh mulch. Not everybody likes mulch, but most people use either a brown mulch, a black mulch, or they'll use a pine straw. There's several different products out there. There's a pine bark mulch. Sometimes people they don't use the mulch if they don't have an edging because the mulch washes out. And they'll use like a no-float cypress mulch. There is a product called Softscape that is just an artificial or synthetic pine straw that is actually not even available anymore. Apparently the factory is closed down, but it's just another option that we've traditionally used here in the Baton Rouge landscapes. And that Softscape did come in all different colors. Some people like red. I don't love red, but if a client requests the red, we will do it. And sometimes it can look nice with like a very tropical landscape, or a very even Mediterranean tropical, whatever architecture you want to call that could look nice with the red. But normally what we're going to use brown. If it's a very modern house, we'll use the black. And then if the client's if they don't have any kind of border or edging and there's going to be a lot of potential for washout, then we'll use a pine straw. There is color enhanced pine straw as well. There's a dyed red. There's just kind of a golden pine straw. Up north, I don't think people have ever seen I talked to somebody one time who was like, what is this? What, y'all use pine straw for mulch? We sure do. Some people will use pine nuggets or like bark nuggets for mulch as well. But right now we're in spring. Spring has sprung. Now is the time to go ahead and get that mulch out. So spring has sprung. Now, continuing on with this podcast, if you see us on YouTube or if you see us on social media, and if you've got a question that you want us to talk about, or a topic that you want to discuss, let us know. Just send us a message, send us an email, And we love to talk about those on this podcast. The whole point of this is to help you with your landscape, to educate, to help people with their landscape. Eventually, we may talk about business. We're going to have other guests on here. But if you got a question, just ask us. Joseph with Landscape King, the Landscape King podcast. Until next time, let's plant some plants.